Okay, good. So here we are recording, and I hope everyone had a good 4th and got to do cool stuff. Did anybody play any 4th of July concerts? No? Anybody see any 4th of July concerts? Yeah, Angela, who'd you see? Okay.
Oh, I watched a concert on TV. So
Oh,
I sat
nice.
here and watched all the different concerts on TV. So yes.
Nice. Yeah, one of my buddies, I don't know, some of you band folks might know Jason Altieri. Do any of you guys know him? He he's a little bit older than me, but he's trombone player. He's conducting the Nevada um, Pops Orchestra. He's done the Atlanta Pops before, but he posted a picture of himself that in like the Uncle Sam outfit with the very comical stuff. So anyway, let's get into Georgia's laws governing homeschooling and your opinion on two of these. So, first off, let's jump in and just see what our takes are on, let's see, it's the OCGA Title 20 code. Basically, the vibe on this is that the accountability of schools. So, well, let's go all the way back to the free and public education, right? It was declared that every student in our great nation was entitled to a free and public education. Now, the key word in there is entitled. Um, it doesn't say required, and that was kind of the thing that kind of got us to where we could say, oh, well, they don't have to, because what did happen for a while there was folks would say, well, they don't have to go to school, or, after a certain age, we don't have to send them anymore, right? And school hours originally kind of adjusted to a lot of things as far as what's it called? Agriculture, which is why we have summers off and why we have certain breaks in the year. It's kind of a tradition that came from that. But uh, the concept of the free and public education kind of got challenged as we got into really the 90s and early 2000s, when when homeschooling started to become more prevalent. And then within the past 20 years, it's become even more prevalent to where people are organizing different things like homeschool art classes or homeschool band programs or I mean, all sorts of different things where people are kind of forming their own types of school. And these laws basically say um, that it's okay that they do that with the understanding that it's on the right of the parent. Now, there is a place for the state to get involved. And that place is if any of it is questioned and the parent is unable to provide adequate explanation of a school environment or demonstration of a school environment, that's where it becomes questionable. And that is a Department of Family and Children's Services issue. And I think I told this class about my twins that I had a couple of years back. Yes, did I tell you guys about them? I have two classes this semester. So anyway, um, I had a pair of twins who came in 3rd grade who had never been to school. And mom and dad just kind of said, go outside. That's where you're going to learn. Go outside and play. And yeah, it definitely put kids behind. And I don't want to go too far into this because I do believe I had this conversation with y'all last week. But again, those kids ended up thriving, but it took a very long time for them to get there. Um, Now, that brings us to where we're at now. And we can also talk about charters in a little bit as well. Um, but basically, you have to be able to demonstrate with a homeschool program that you have up to 180 days of school um, over a 12-month period. So let's see here what our takes are that stands out the most to you. And what I'd like to do, just pick one. Let's get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, this is what I will do. I'm gonna break us into groups and we can pick out a couple. What do we think here? Let's do two breakout rooms, okay? And I'll let you I'm gonna have it assign automatically. Okay. So once I open these rooms, I want to give you about 5 minutes and I want you to kind of talk about within your group one or two of the laws that you think apply best, and really your opinion on yay or nay for homeschool and how it affects you as a teacher in public school. All right. So here we go. Rooms are open. All you got to do is click join. It is 6:09. We'll go till 6:15 or 5:15. Sorry.
Can you send me back to room one? I accidentally hit the wrong button.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, it's not me.
Okay.
I hit nothing but join.
Okay.
Try one more time,
I'm going to
please.
send you to room two, and then I'm going to send you back to room one. Okay. And then you'll see something that says join. Got it?
Okay. Yep.
Okay. Now I'm going to send you back to room one, and you should see something that says join. Okay.
Right.
Um,
I feel like it's kind of wild that in order to teach, you want to have you have to have a bachelor's and like pass through and go through all these hoops and everything in order to teach at a public school. But then parents are able to just keep their kids home as long as they graduated high school or completed their GED at some point. And we know, especially now, that those high school diplomas are kind of just like, just show up. All right.
yeah, that's so true. Well, it's very interesting. My brother-in-law, he does a homeschool band out in Marietta and Powder Springs. And I forgot what the group is called, but they there's this like little area within this part of Cobb.
Anybody could just do homeschooling.
Me too.
Yeah,
Exactly. That's why when
I
I
thought it
saw
was
that, I
as
was like,
long as they had a high school diploma.
that's what it is. You have to have a high school diploma or a GED.
Yes.
But I guess, yeah, I never even thought, well, yeah, they should
I
have.
didn't think, I thought if you're a parent, you can do homeschool.
Right, right. Same.
But
So,
that's all the qualifications that you need is a high school
Yeah,
diploma or a GED. Yeah.
that's it. That's it.
mm-hmm.
I think that kind of opens up to, I mean, even as a teacher, right? I'm certified visual arts is my main thing. And then I'm certified in middle grades ELA math and social, or not social studies, ELA math and science. But I'm going, those categories I wouldn't feel confident teaching
Right.
curriculum in. So I think it would be very challenging, you
And I
know.
think a lot of it now is that they have the homeschooling program. So technically the parents aren't teaching them. They are
Right.
putting them on a platform that is a homeschooling platform, and whatever
Yeah.
I guess essentially they have to have a high school diploma or a GED to basically monitor them.
Right. So it's like
Um,
virtual learning kind of thing.
exactly
Mhm.
is
Which
essentially what's happening.
I think could be beneficial for some students. Like, there are some students where, you know, their anxiety is genuinely through the roof. They do not do well in the large group environment, and you're going, whoo, this is not the place for you to be. And so, like, for those students, I can totally understand it. But also, I had some friends who were homeschooled growing up, and the challenge with that was you don't get quite the same level of social interaction.
Right.
So the
Rigor
social
also
development
because
sometimes.
yeah, definitely social, but then also the rigor because they build upon each other's ideas. Well, if you don't have
Right.
anybody to build upon, right? Like if you're homeschooling, you might be on a platform. Like obviously now, most homeschools are probably on some type of digital platform. However, they still have old school where they can teach it directly from a book. And in that case, you're really losing the whole social aspect.
Have to you don't have to report any tests, grades, or anything. You have to keep them. I mean, they can kind of like audit for them, but you're not required to send those in. There's
Right.
no, so okay, my child's gifted, but who says so? You? I mean,
Yeah, it feels like there's just very little accountability, and it's just very interesting considering how much, well, I guess you could talk to some people and they would say that we don't have a lot of accountability, but like it feels like we have significantly more accountability. And then there's the whole social aspect. I know we're not really talking about the pros and cons of homeschooling, but like I know I had cousins who were homeschooled for religious reasons,
Mm-hmm.
and socially, it was just, I mean, it was obviously very telling. Like we would get together for holidays, and my sister
Well,
and I socially were like more advanced.
one of my most of the music majors at Truett McConnell University are homeschooled. We're homeschooled, and one of my flute majors is, and she was an all-state flute player, and they were doing. She was in Forsyth County, and in third grade, they sent home a letter wanting to start talking about developing bodies or something, and she pulled her kid out. She pulled Anna Kay out of public school in Forsyth County, and that's what Anna Kay told me. But she was homeschooled from third grade all the way to graduation. She's a music ed major, and we were going through the clinics for in service, and I was like, oh, these will be some really good ones. There's this one on like integrating technology, and she was like, well, I still don't know what my path is going to be for music education. I was like, well, what do you're going to have to student teach in a public classroom. You can't student teach in a private school. You can't, that you'll have to, I mean, to get your diploma, that's what you'll have to do. And she was like, well, when I have it, can I still teach? And I was like, well, yeah, of course you can. Her whole idea about earning her degree in music education, which she's doing well in, but then the understanding that I'm actually going to go and teach children in a public school. It's like, well, you could teach private school. You could do what Jennifer Clapp does. She has a homeschool orchestra, and it works out great for her, that she does. But she's that whole concept of her. She still is struggling to wrap her head around being an educator in a public or even private school. Because even in a private school, that's still a structured learning environment. I think more so structured than a homeschooling environment. So the whole concept of it is very skewed to a lot of them. They're socially they're very reserved. A lot of the Truett kids, they're very, very respectful. They're very conservative. They're very polite. Um, they're very different students than the students we teach on an everyday basis. But
well, I think homeschooling, like if you're a teacher, I think it makes you at best really good at teaching one kind of student with one kind of
right,
need. I mean, so when you're a student in that kind of environment, it's really different as well. And I
I
think
I
think
think
that's
the
where she's
whole,
at.
I also think the whole like, because at least the situations I hear of, usually it's the parents taking on that role.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's not the situation in other systems, but or like in other situations, but I feel like the majority of what I hear is like the parent taking on that role. So it's also an interesting dynamic to think of, a parent thinking, okay, I'm going to educate my child, not having an education background. And then I think it's just like very telling of like the problems that we're having today in our schools where, like parents are kind of and I say this very generally, but like we're seeing a lot of behaviors that were supposed to be addressed at home not being
Right.
addressed. And that's the stuff that's coming in. So like is the alternative happening at home if they're being homeschooled where like maybe they have those behaviors that we would want at the school, but they're
shift to that.
Okay.
So because you did it, do you feel like it was beneficial now since you can compare it to public school?
Absolutely. I wouldn't have stopped if we didn't need money.
Fair.
Yeah, I liked it more, and I'm sure it's because I'm a certified teacher, but I liked it more because I had control over what they were learning. We shifted not only because they were performers, but my middle daughter was getting bullied at a private Christian school. You know what I'm saying? Like all of the things that you have no control over in public school. I got a chance to control that. And the testing things, like test scores and grades, and again, some of my kids were like getting anxiety over like these test scores and grades. Oh my gosh, I got a B, or I got.
I agree. It's definitely over testing.
And so they don't even care about grades anymore. They care to get an A because they get A's now. You know what I'm saying? But I told them I had the chance to reprogram them and say, like, if you get something lower than an A, it just means you don't know something. Let's figure out what that is. So nobody was stressing over, and I'm sure I'm the minority with homeschooling, but
I think the time constraints too. Everything is so fast paced in public school. Like you got to hit this, and this. You have to have these many assessments done. You have like the curriculum. Like we have so much that we have to cover in this small amount of time. I imagine that the stress isn't there. But again, you are a certified teacher. I'm just thinking about regular parents who are not educators.
Right.
We met quite a few parents in that journey that weren't teachers that had a lot of success with it too. And the other thing to consider with that as well is you get to teach things that aren't taught in school, like cooking and manners and just the things that we kind of take for granted, how to speak to adults, how to be courteous, how to, just simple things like that. So ultimately there are a lot of reasons that homeschool is a viable option, whether you are a certified teacher or not.
Yeah. I also think too, the child, it really depends on your kid too. I know my oldest, when I had to do virtual learning with him at home, it was brutal. And I have a, background in early childhood, and he just could not do it. And he wasn't willing to listen to me. So I don't know.
So this document also says, I know you guys were asking about like, could they test every year if you wanted them to for that data?
Yeah.
This document from Georgia Department of Education just says that the student must be evaluated at least every 3 years, beginning at the end of the 3rd grade. So since it says at least every 3 years, my guess is you probably could do it more often if you wanted to.
Are you talking about gifted testing?
No, we're talking about standardized testing.
Oh, standard. Okay.
Yeah. So,
Okay.
and then it says you have to write an annual progress report every year. Who is that submitted to? Is that submitted to the Department of Education? Because it doesn't specify what I'm looking at. It doesn't specify who you give that to. It says you have to have the annual progress reports, but I wonder if that's just necessary so you have it in the bag just in case they're questioning whether or not you're actually educating your kid.
I'm also reading that it says you do not have to submit the results of the testing. So there's no like verification.
So then I wonder, and I know the Brooks were saying that they had success, but I wonder if since Georgia is not super restrictive in their homeschooling regulations, like I wonder if they felt like it was too simple to kind of do homeschool. Like, oh, okay, I just have to do my letter of intent and da 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 da, and bam, my kids are in homeschool. And then I keep my little annual progress report. Or if there should be more regulation. I don't know if they're still with us or if they had to put us on pause. I know they were traveling. But I just wonder if how they felt about should there be more regulation. Oh, there they are. That was Brooks family. I had a quick question. Do you feel like there needs to be more regulation for the homeschooling in Georgia?
Think there could be
Yeah.
more regulation. That's what I was saying I feel like that was my response for the discussion. There could be more, but I think the homeschool concept is just the theme is flexibility. Like, so you have the flexibility and the freedom to teach your child how you want to. Now, I know there are plenty of cases where that's not a good thing. People they may not know. But like he said, most of the people that in the homeschool group or the group that we ended up talking to, they weren't teachers. Like, so it was just regular parents who were like,
And were they confident about teaching the subjects? I'm just
going
wondering.
into it, probably
Because
not.
what Shelby was saying.
Well, hey there, look at us. We're all back in here. Yes? Fantastic. So, the thing about homeschool, and I'm going to turn it over to you guys in just a moment. Homeschool gives a lot of opportunity and flexibility to families. My dissertation was actually about a program called Forsyth Academy, and it's a program that has since changed to the Academies of Creative Education in Forsyth County. But what it was they had it was a 4 day a week. They added an hour to the school day. And it was a 4 day week. And day 5 of the week was makeup. So if you had to miss for any reason, you would come in on day 5 and you could work at your own pace. And everything that they did was using the Apex computers. And with Apex, it was basically a guided curriculum. And what's interesting about Apex is there's people who love it and there's people who can't stand it. What we have found, yeah, well, and the thing was, it was part of the Forsyth County Public Schools. It was the alternative school. And what we found was that when we had a highly qualified teacher facilitating the Apex program, we had a 93% graduation rate. Not completion, graduation rate. There's a difference between graduation and completion. Um, and when we didn't have a highly qualified person in there with them, but the school used Apex and allowed that to happen, they had an 85% graduation rate. And my dissertation was what is called a program evaluation, which is a mixed methods type of study where I took quantitative and qualitative data and put it all together. And this was the results of, is it worth the financial investment in this program or a program like Apex if it means that there's kids who would not have otherwise graduated from high school, if it simply can exist as an option to raise your graduation rate to 85% from we don't know? I would say the answer appeared to be yes. Now, with the laws here with the public school, sorry, not public school, with homeschooling, basically takes that same idea of what the Apex program, what they were doing at Forsyth Academy, and says, listen, this is how many days of school you have to have. This is how many, this is what constitutes a day, contact hours or whatever. And you guys are familiar with that based on what you're doing in your program right here at Piedmont, right? If we were to go by the letter of the law in Piedmont, you guys would be meeting, this class right now would be a 3-hour class, right? Every day. What? Yeah, man. So there's a lot that we take into account on what exactly is a contact hour and how people are actually able to be held accountable for the work that they're doing. Now, I heard as I was going back and forth from the room, some of you were talking about, well, we were part of the Brookses were saying that they were part of a homeschool network, and there were a lot of people there that were not teachers that were either facilitating or teaching the stuff. Now, in the state of Georgia, you don't have to be a certified teacher to teach in a private school. Never have. Now, most private schools will only hire certified teachers because that's a selling point. But I'll tell you, a person who became a dear friend of mine through the years was a music teacher at the Hebrew Academy. She was there for 50 years teaching music at the Hebrew Academy. Her name's Donna Wise. Donna is not a certified music teacher, but she's been the music teacher there for so long that the state of Georgia gave her, I guess, an honorary certification in music. But she was a certified English teacher, but she'd been teaching, literally her whole career, she'd been teaching music. But because it's a private school, the fact that she's not a certified music teacher, she was able to teach it for a very long time. It wasn't until GW came in that we had to be specifically, where the term highly qualified came into what our content areas are that we teach. Before then, if I was teaching music, and this actually happened in my career, they said, hey, we need somebody to teach typing for one segment. Can you do that? You bet. I need a job. Yeah, I'll teach typing. Do I know how to type? I mean, I do now. I didn't do it properly then, but I do now. We need somebody to teach this. Can you do that? Yep. I need a job. I'll do that. Right? It's changed. Now in homeschool, they don't necessarily have to have the highly qualified piece, but they do have to have the accountability piece. Now I heard you guys saying something about standardized testing, but they don't have to report the scores, right? That's great. Why do we do standardized testing? This is not a philosophical question. This is a straight up financial question. Why do we do standardized testing in public schools?
To predict how well they'll do. Because I know standardized tests are used as a predicting measure for how well students will do in college.
They're just,
it's money
that's
for the
one piece
county.
of the pie.
Yeah, it's money for the counties. They keep the teachers accountable, and then the schools accountable, and it's money.
Standardized testing is an accountability, yes, and it is a justification of financial expense, right? I want to make sure, which is why they have done in the past, if you are not performing at this level, the state could come in and take over your programs, right? Because they need to protect their investment, which is in our children, who, again, free and public education. Now, with things like homeschool, I am going to take that because we're accounting for a piece of the population, whether they be homeschool, public school, private school, doesn't matter. As a private school, one of the things that happened was, they started taking those standardized test scores and submitting them and trying to receive. And in some cases, in the first, I don't want to get too political, but in one of our prior presidents' administrations, who has had more than one reign, and I won't say who, reign is the term though. Money was based on, achievement, and being able to, when private schools were able to demonstrate their achievement, they were then able to ask for funds, federal funds, for a private school, and they were granted. I'm going to let that sink in for a second. Federal funds, money from our government, federal government. Okay, we receive money from three places in school, right? Federal, state, local. And the biggest piece of those funds come from local. Second, state, and then federal. But the federal government is in charge, or until very recently has been in charge of all of that, with the national, the Department of Education, the federal Department of Education, which we no longer have. Did you know that, guys? There is no longer a National Education Secretary, which is weird, but at the same point, we have had a Secretary of Education in our nation who didn't have children in public school. That was how private schools were able to get public school funds. But again, these are the things that we should be aware of as we're moving forward in education as the teachers, right? And you got to know where this is all coming from and what it is and why it is. But again, if I'm trying to demonstrate, if I'm one of the Brookses here and I want to say, listen, homeschool programs are great, here's why. And then they have something like some quantitative data that they could share, i.e., standardized test scores, the number of kids that their homeschool band program is putting in honor organizations. That's all measurable data. Well, that's a good reason to say, hey, you know what? Maybe that is a good thing, right? And I will say that the concept of homeschool has gotten a lot more of a positive light especially since COVID. There's a lot of children that deal with a lot more anxiety and any of the stuff that most of us had to deal with. And again, the why, it's crazy, but if you look at grade point averages of a lot of kids that are graduating from high school, those kids are making pretty close to straight A's, like a lot more of them than when we were in school. Why do you think that is? You ready? You already know it, but hope. Okay. So if I'm offered a free college education, which, by the way, at the University of Georgia, that free college education is $12,500 a year, but that's okay, because that's what it was in 1987 for a not free public education at the University of Georgia when my brother went there, right? But now the free education comes based on your academics. Now, if my academics mean that I need to have a 3.5 or higher to get that full ride, whether it be the Zell or whatever, the Hope, what does that say to any school in the University of System in Georgia? Well, let's reflect. to get into the University of Georgia. The average student right now getting into the University of Georgia has over a 4.0, better than straight A's. Okay. The average SAT score in the nation is right around 1,000. To get into the University of Georgia, a state-funded college, 1,400 out of 1,600. Okay, that's the average. Now, to get a free ride, right, with the Hope and the Zell, you have to have basically whatever the requirements are to get into the University of Georgia. So what that means is every kid in that freshman class that's from Georgia is going for free, which is awesome. But at the same point, what does that say about our grading principles as educators? How real is that measurement? We had, when No Child Left Behind came out, the statement that was made was, we will make sure that all of our students are testing in the top 90th percentile. Let's talk about what a percentile means. That's impossible, because if every one of you got a 100, guess what that means? You are in the 0 percentile. You can't be in the higher percentile because you're all in the same group. If we put everybody in the same group, that same group would either be in the middle or the bottom. It can't be at the top. So with those things in place, I would like to give you guys, and I'm pretty sure, did we talk about, I think we did talk about standardized testing and what baseline data means. No, that may have been my other class I talked about this with. Do you know that in the years that we've been giving the Georgia milestone or the EOCTs in the middle and high school, we have yet to establish a baseline? Yes? Do you know why? In order to establish a baseline data, you have to have 3 consecutive years of data sets. Now, to have an accurate data set, you cannot change the variables. What have we done since we've been initiating these tests? First, we started with pencil and paper. Then we brought in some computers. And then there was those who were still taking with pencil and paper within the same building. And then we brought in all computers. Great. But then we had desktops and laptops. Well, that's a different way of giving the test, because a desktop computer uses a mouse like this. A laptop computer does not. Kids are taking the test differently. And then we changed around different aspects of the test. We went from testing from first, third, fourth, and fifth grade to third, fourth, and fifth grade to now we do third, fourth, and fifth grade, but they don't do science anymore unless they're in fifth grade. We don't do social studies anymore at all. And they've made the science multiple choice, but then they've added a writing element, and then they've added there have been so many, you can't, even with your language arts piece, when you add a writing component, which is great, right? You're also adding a different form of measurement to that component, right? There's a short form and there's a long form. But then when you take that away, well, now I can't use that data set anymore because it's not a true data set. The next thing that I have, I can only measure the stuff that hasn't changed. And there have been so many things that have changed, we don't have a baseline. But we in education are allowing, and I understand why, because it's difficult to challenge this, but we're allowing people to say, you could be held back if you don't pass the Georgia milestone test. Well, how? As compared to what? Right? If there's no baseline, what are you comparing to? Right? If I were to say this year's students are so much better than last year's students, it's because of all of the great teaching that I did last year. No, they're different kids, right? If all of my third graders are killing it this year and next year my third graders are not killing it, it's not because I'm a bad third grade teacher. It's a different group of kids. Um, and again, baselines. You got to be able to establish that data. Now, the most accurate way to do that would be if I'm looking at my fifth grade data and say, okay, how did this group do in third grade? How did they do in fourth grade? In the same subject, the same group, and how did they do in fifth grade? There you can measure something, but only you can only measure it if you can say in the same style of test, delivered the same way. We're using Chromebooks. Great. Are all of us using Chromebooks? And you can micro that all the way down, and you can argue that multiple different ways as well. But I'm telling you, um, if you want to go with a strictly scientific method on that, it is not sound the way that we've done it. Not yet. That doesn't mean it's not a good test. The test itself is fine. The fact that the test has evolved is fine. But what the test measures is still uncertain. Okay. In, I believe it was 87, the Surgeon General warnings started to appear on cigarettes, right? Smoking causes cancer. Here's the thing about that. We're pretty sure it does, but to prove that would be a violation of ethics because you would have to actually have a control group where you say, okay, we're going to have these people who have the same genetic makeup as these other people, and we're going to have them smoke and this group not smoke. Well, that's very unethical. World War II taught us that, right? Hitler did all those tests on twins. You guys heard about all that research, yes? Messed up stuff, man. Frightening, messed up stuff. Um, but that's where ethics and all of that stuff really started to come into the world of research. And I'm not going to dig too far in there because you'll get that when you take 8823. You'll learn about research ethics. But just the ethics in general of what we do here, getting back to Forsyth Academy, bringing this all back in. The cool thing about that program to me was there were kids in that program that were, professional child actors, that were athletes that played for the Gwinnett Gladiators or the Gwinnett Braves at the time, who were kind of working their way into other fields of what they wanted to do, professional musicians, professional whatever, even at a very young age. So that schedule of being 4 days of school, even if you had to miss Wednesday, you could go Friday and make that time up. That was really, really good. Now, this was before COVID, and after COVID, homeschool was able to really take off even more and kind of mirror a little bit of what that Forsyth Academy did. What I'd like to do now is I know you guys took some time and I heard some great conversation. I'd like to give you guys the opportunity to jump in. I'm going to start just by saying, when I call on you, and I'm going to give everybody a chance to say something, I would, just like your 2 cents on a law that related to homeschooling, your take on it. Is it beneficial? Maybe not for you, but for children in general. If it's beneficial for your children, if it's beneficial for, just our community as a whole. So let's hear that. I'm going to start with Josie, and then after Josie, I'm going to have Brittany and then Amanda. Okay?
One thing we talked about was the law where you don't have to have anything past a high school diploma or a GED, in order to be the facilitator for homeschooling. Um, in my opinion, I I think it really just depends on the facilitator. And that's something else that we talked about, how in a public school, no matter what, there's going to be some form of structure, be that the schedule or the curriculum calendar. Um, there's going to be some form of structure no matter what. So, like, even if a kid isn't doing well in one class or if they're not doing well in all the other classes, they are still involved in some kind of structure. So they have some percentage of success, and there's a lot more variables in it. Whereas if you're homeschooled, again, this is just my opinion, but like I feel like it's more all or nothing. If the facilitator is super organized, it super with it, and that's their like focus, and they want to make sure that they're doing the best that they can, absolutely, it can 100% be successful, even if you don't have a college degree. But it is interesting that for public education, we have all of these accountability measures. When I student taught and was preparing to be a first year teacher, I had to do EdTPA, and that was a whole bunch of hoop jumping that I had to get through in order to be a teacher. So it's interesting that in order to be a teacher in the public education system, we have 4 years of preparation on top of student teaching, on top of EdTPA, on top of getting certified, on top of the GACE, on top of everything else. And then but you can keep your kids at home and teach them successfully or not, as long as you have a high school diploma or a GED, which especially now we know that a lot of people are graduating with their high school diplomas who don't necessarily deserve to have earned it.
Okay. Okay. Brittany, and then Amanda, and then Angela after that. Brittany?
The one thing that stood out to me was looking at just at the very small number of states that have strict regulations for homeschooling. So I feel like if public school is regulated so heavily, and I know this is because they're receiving funds, obviously, that's why the regulation is going to be heavy. Anytime they're handing out money, they're going to try to watch it. But that it's just it's minimal, the regulation of homeschool. So I feel like anytime that you have people who genuinely they have their kids in homeschool because it is a better environment for them and they feel like they can teach them, they have the flexibility to kind of teach them in different ways that you don't have in the classroom just because it's not possible when you have, over 20 something kids. But I also feel like because it's so easy that all you have to do is submit this letter of intent. I was looking at the DOE website, and literally the only thing that has to be submitted to them is the letter of intent. That's the only thing that has to be submitted. Nothing else has to be submitted to them. So the question becomes like, how do we know that these kids are getting, I hate to say like what they need, but how do we know that they are essentially on the same level that we're requiring for students who are in public school to graduate, right? How do we know that they're on that same level? And I wonder what the numbers look like for kids who have been homeschooled going to some of these colleges like UGA that require, a certain grade point average, a certain SAT score. And I guess obviously if they score pretty well on their SAT, then they probably have gotten a really good education. But I just wonder how many people are loopholing it just for them kids to kind of at least have a high school diploma. And because their kids can't go to school, whether that's because of behavioral issues, whatever the case may be. I know when I first started teaching, I worked in an area with a lot of families who had farms. They, had agriculture. And I had a student who was in the 8th grade, and I think he was about to be 16. And like I would try to push him, hey, you just need to do this, you just need to do this. And he'd be like, I don't need to do this. Like I literally plan on dropping out. Like I'm going and working on the farm. Like, because their family had a farm. Like he saw no need in getting his high school diploma. And if he would have, in my mind, I'm just thinking if he would have done homeschool, right? Like, are they really going to sit him down for 4.5 hours and have him doing his math and his ELA and his science and his social studies? Like, I highly doubt that. Not with them running an entire farm, their small family, right? Like he clearly is learning something. He's learning agriculture, and he probably knows a lot more than the other kids at the school about a profession that he's going to probably go into because his family owns the farm. So it is good in that sense that is setting him up for success with what he is going to be doing. But then I guess education kind of gives you something to fall back on because then you're not just, you don't have this narrow, space where it's like, okay, well, I did homeschool and I know everything about agriculture because I know that's what I'm going to do, period. And I just feel like, especially now, like our economy is so unstable. Like you might be thinking you're going to do this, and then all of a sudden it changes because something happens. And that could be a natural disaster because, I mean, every day we're having a storm that's wiping out entire areas. And then you have to fall back on some other type of skill. And I just don't know if we're creating well-rounded individuals if you have students who are doing homeschooling in the case where there might be a parent who's just doing a loophole, like I can't deal with this public school. My kid doesn't want to go, this, that, and the other. I need them at home to do this because I'm running a farm. That's my biggest thing. It's just that the regulations, like there's so many states who just have minimal regulations on homeschool. And it's kind of a slap in the face because I had to do EdTPA too, and I would not wish that on anybody.
All right, good. Amanda, then Angela, and then Matt.
So one of the things that I saw was students participating in extracurricular activities. If they're homeschooled, they can participate in public school extracurricular activities like sports, as long as they can prove that they are like passing their classes, that they're the right age for the sport, and that grade level they're in this they're within that school district and zoning. Now they're still going to be held to the same behavioral standards as a normal public school student would be while they're in that extracurricular sport. But if a parent doesn't always have to be honest about, like, my child's passing their homeschool subjects or they're always doing their work. A parent can easily make all that up, and just so their kids could participate in a sport, especially if it's a sport that the child may be very good at and the school system has a track record of, doing well in that specific sport. But my whole thing is if the school is if the school is good enough for extracurricular activities, why is it not good enough to provide a whole academic education? Like that's a big kind of question in that, because you're gonna send your kid after school for a few hours every day to participate in this sport, whether it's soccer or football or whatever, but they can't come here from like 8 to 3:30 and learn with the rest of their teammates, and then you have to think about all the students that are in public school. Now they're on a sports team with students or student who isn't with them during the day. How can they build a rapport with that classmate? How can the coaches get to learn that classmate, learn their family? I mean, it's just, I don't think that really makes for a very winning combination. I don't see that helping the overall like social aspect for the kids in public school or private school. I just think it's the parents' way of, I mean, it almost looks like a slap in the face for all these teachers that are doing quality work in the classroom. But your football team's good, so we'll let our kid go play football. At least you're good at that. That's kind of how I would take that. And I mean, I would even say that way for marching band too. Like, I get your kid wants to play trumpet, and they make all state band, but they need to be in school every day, because during the day we may go over that marching band music, or we may be watching film from our Friday night performance or Saturday competition, and they're not going to be here for that part of the curriculum. And so,
but I know my part, Amanda. I know
that's very trumpet player mentality, young man. Very trumpet player mentality. Right. But you, I mean,
no, you're absolutely right, and that is a very common argument.
Yeah.
Yep. All right, Angela, then Matt, and then Tammy.
Okay. I was also concerned with the qualifications, because I didn't know actually that you needed a qualification at all. And then I found out that their qualification was minimal, but that was concerned. But another thing that I was concerned about was the fact that there's no state support for special education services
Mm-hmm.
for them because I guess I was concerned because I do SST and I was wondering, and I know I had kids from they were homeschooled. This actually last semester, I had a 12th grader homeschooled. Mom wanted to get her to get what is it like accommodation for SAT and ACT,
Mm-hmm.
but because there's no, I guess there's no special, no state support for that. So now they told her to come to the school that her child would have gone to, which is was zoned for, which is our school. It was a lot of work trying to get her because you had to have a set of baseline, trying to get her to come to the school when because I'm teaching a milestone class and I couldn't get her to come certain time. She can't come certain time when and it was just hard. But I was just wondering. I guess I don't know. The state of Georgia could offer some optional state support for funding for things like that. Maybe.
I, unfortunately, they don't let me make those decisions. Um,
But anyway, that was my area of concern. Another one.
Good. All right, Matt, and then Tammy, and then Christina.
Um, one that one that I found interesting was just like the required course that you offer. It's very limiting, if none at all, as far as like connection classes, special interest classes. So there's really a lack of exposure to, the fine arts or your CTAE classes and foreign language and things like that. And so it can kind of be tailored to the parent's own interest rather than trying to figure out what the child may be interested in or what may be the best, possible um, classes for your child. They may not get that exposure. And also, when we have kids leaving or coming back into the public schools, there's that gap of, exposure and, so I was telling my group that over the summer we had a parent contact us and they want their child to be in orchestra, but only for orchestra, not any academic subjects. And she's in seventh grade, so she'd be coming at the end of every day during seventh period. But apparently she has already 4 years worth of orchestra playing. And so it kind of creates a situation where it do they just want her to be a part of a class just to say that she is, or is she really 4 years of what kind of instruction? I have no idea. I mean, has she been, playing along with
Suzuki.
YouTube videos at
It's
home, or has she had tutoring? And then is the mother a member of GMEA? If so I know some homeschool parents they do it sole like they are the teacher, but I know they send some kids are sent to a cohort where I think Amanda's brother-in-law, he's actually a homeschool he's a trumpet player, but he's a homeschool music teacher, and he goes into these small cohorts and teaches. And he makes more money in a week than I do in a month, and so it just there's a potential for disparities and gaps when you want to m marry the two homeschool and public schools.
yeah.
So that'll be interesting, and I mean, I'm looking forward to it. I just hope that you know if she's been getting hardcore 4 years of one-on-one instruction, it may seem like a not the best use of her time to come and join a second year orchestra classroom. So.
But if it is the case, Matt, wouldn't that help her a great deal developing her ears, as far as understanding how to get intonation together
Yes,
with an
absolutely.
ensemble, how to develop a group sound? I mean, there's There's a lot
I'm
that,
all for it.
yeah, yeah. Okay, Tammy, then Christina, then Shelby.
All right. Yes, actually, Amanda took mine earlier because I was going to talk about the Dexter Mosley Act and of that was signed in law in 21. But I think it's a good that act is actually a good sort of marriage, so to speak, between homeschool and public school. That's if I decided to homeschool my children, that they could go to public school extracurricular activities. But they still have to follow the rules. They have to contact the superintendent 30 days before the program starts, and they have to be in the know, so to speak, when practices and tryouts and all that go. And so they have to have some communication with the school system with all that to set everything up. But I will say that my husband is a professor at Gordon State University. I wish they were university, Gordon State College, and he was saying to me that they consider homeschool students like I think he called it a crapshoot because you don't know what you're going to be getting. The students can have all straight A's but there's no standard for them to measure against. They can have a straight A student could be brilliant and then a straight A student really struggle. But they accept them. They accept them and everything. I did like the idea that for homeschooling, you you can actually hire a tutor to tutor your child, but they have to have the same educational requirements to teach. So I thought, well, that's one person with a high school diploma teaching another, getting their student, giving their child to a parent or so with another high school diploma.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was sort of funny, but that's my 2 cents.
All right. Christina, followed by Shelby, and then Yuri.
So I would say there's positives to both, public school, private school, and even homeschooling. I really think if you have the opportunity to homeschool, it really comes down to your kid too. I know if I were to homeschool my child, my oldest, it wouldn't work. He's just not that kind of kid. He will listen to his teacher and he won't listen to me when it comes to that. I mean, I see it when we do our homework and when we were virtual. The other thing I thought that was concerning is just the logistics of it. Reading that you have to have 4.5 hours of instructional time. If you're homeschooling, let's say 3 or 4 children, and they're in different age groups or grades, how are you really like realistically meeting those standards? So I feel like even if you want to, I don't know how likely that is to meet that. So I don't know.
I hear you. Christina, I went to private school for undergrad. Um, all of my friends went to the big universities and all that stuff. I was in undergrad for about 6 weeks before I realized there was no way I would ever survive in a big school.
Yeah.
Um, I skipped class once in my entire college experience. I skipped class once, and Dr. Joe Haygood, who was my music theory professor, showed up at my dorm. None of us had cell phones or any of that stuff yet. Knocked on my door, wanted to make sure I was okay because there were 5 people in the class, and when I wasn't there, it was noticeable.
Mhm.
So for me, that was exactly the right call.
Mhm. Yeah.
But okay, Shelby, then Yuri, and then we finish up with the Brookses. All right, Shelby.
So initially, when I came into this conversation, I've only had the perspective of friends who have been homeschooled, right? And I think hearing everyone talk, hearing from the Brookses, I gotta say, I think my opinion on it all has changed. So, for example, earlier, I can't remember who it was mentioning like loopholing, right? And like, are we loopholing it? And it makes me go, well, a lot of schools require that we don't give the students below a 60 so that they have time to catch up on grades, right? So that they can come back. That's a loophole, right? Like we're already loopholing education. And while it could be seen as a slap in the face for parents to go, okay, well, I can do this better than you can, I think of it in terms of a classically trained artist versus a self-taught artist, right? I'm not going to look at a self-taught artist and go, well, you're a piece of crap because you didn't go to college for 4 years like I did and do all this training. Like, how dare you learn to do this on your own? How dare you have the confidence to do that? I do think that there definitely needs to be more accountability because there are going to be those students where, they're being homeschooled, but it could potentially, I think what I worry about most are students that are in abusive situations and there's no one around to help see that and help get them out. I think that's what scares me the most about the parents choosing that option. But I mean, disparities already exist in public education anyway. If a kid, while I was at STEM Academy, if a kid came from one of the other middle schools in the district to me and I go, cool, what do you know? It could be vastly different, and it's still public school to public school. I, especially after hearing from the Brookses, I think I really appreciate the flexibility that it does provide because when you think about as a teacher, there are so many things where I go, God, could people just hands off my curriculum and let me teach? Can they just let me do my thing? I want my kids to feel confident. I want them to learn to be themselves. And to be honest, homeschooling does provide that if you're going about it the right way. The whole point would be the flexibility to tailor it to your student. So even the student where if they're focused on agriculture, I mean, if that's what they know they want to do, I mean, I've spent bukus of money the last 3 years going to school for a master's and a specialist in art education. I didn't learn for other grades. I didn't learn for any other subject matter. I've really kind of pigeonholed myself into art education. So if I choose to leave education, there's not much falling back on that. I can say I got a piece of paper on the wall, but there's not much falling back on it. So a little bit of the devil's advocate there on some of the points that we've brought up. And then the last thing that I had written down as a note for myself was, at the end of the day, I want my parents involved in their kids' schooling. I want them to be invested in what they're learning and how they're learning. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've tried to call and email parents going, dear God, can you just please pick up the phone so I can talk to you about your kids' education? So the fact there are parents who are wanting to be involved to the point where they're going, okay, well, I want my kid to have, the opportunity to, I don't know, let's go to the beach and learn about erosion and learn about, whatever sea life. I don't know. I'm not a sciencey person, but you know what I mean? Like having the flexibility to maneuver around and provide different opportunities that they might not get while they're sitting in a classroom for, 7 hours a day.
Very good. Very good. Yuri, and then Adam is going to wrap it up for us. Yuri.
All right. So everybody has basically said everything that I wanted to say. The one thing that comes up for me really is I wish that there was more regulation, because from a teacher's standpoint, I've been in so many situations where, okay, not so many, but a good handful enough of situations where, there's a behavior problem with the students. So the parents withdraw the student saying that they're going to homeschool them, but there's no timetable for when they have to start, because that 180 days, 4.5 hours is whenever. So there's no timetable. And so they're gone for 3 months. Did they get any homeschooling or any kind of schooling? No, because 3 months later they come right back because of whatever reasons. And that's 3 months of learning and structure that has been lost. So I just wish that there was more regulation in accountability for homeschooling in that regard. And going back to the extracurricular, I was at a school in my high school where we had a student where they were homeschooled and they came in just for the band program. And they only came in after school, and it was really hard for that student to make friends. And I honestly don't remember that student staying in band for more than a year, and for whatever reason, but I never really connected with that student. I just remember there was one homeschool student that came in just for band. That it so like I can see how it would be beneficial for those students who are homeschooled to have that opportunity to be able to be part of larger organizations that are in their zone for their public school, to be part of like a band or theater program or even sports for that matter. I totally understand what Amanda was saying about it, but at the same point, I feel like kids should have that opportunity, because when else are they going to have that opportunity? So why not just let them, do it? But do they actually really, get all that's, afforded to them with that experience? I feel like sometimes they just feel kind of an outsider and they never really do connect. So I don't know. But like how Shelby was saying too, listening to the Brookses talking about their homeschooling experience, that it kind of opened my eyes too and made me think about it from a different perspective. So I appreciated the Brookses sharing their experience.
Excellent. Thank you, Yuri. And now wrapping it up, driving this home, we've got Toya and Adam Brooks.
All right. Everybody kind of came in kind of hot with their takes. I see why you saved this for last. I remember when I first started teaching, maybe somewhere around year 3 or 4, I had an all-state bassoon player that was homeschooled, that only came in for after-school practice. And I used to be so upset, like, you're missing all this class time. We're covering so many different things. And it's like, well, she's an all-stater, but still, it's just like, the SEL component of it, the whole thing. So I probably lived and experienced what a lot of people are feeling about this particular take for most of my career, until we had no other choice but to homeschool. Our 3 daughters are all performers, and we had to make the choice to do it. My wife was just fantastic on it. So when we had no choice, we adapted. My take on this, well, our take on this is that, number one, there should never be anything that creates something that doesn't allow for option. I agree with Brittany, there needs to be lots of checks and balances, but we have to make sure that when we're looking at things that I know we're probably data to support what they are, but I was in a very heated debate maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. Literally, that free and reduced lunch is the worst thing that ever happens to students, and it takes accountability from the parents. But like, we're making the kids be at school, they should be fed, but that's a whole nother thing. So we're kind of looking at this homeschool thing as if it's a slap in the face to the teacher, that they're not going to get X, Y, and Z, that they're not, but we're not looking at it when it does. And realistically, especially having done it, we've run across more people that have had way more success than not. So we have to kind of make sure that we're keeping that lens, and then when we make the decisions on this stuff, we can't look at it as, well, they're not going to get this, or they're not in my classroom, or they could have been here for 7 hours as opposed to being here for 2 or 3, or whatever the case. We're not looking at what it did for them emotionally. We're not looking for what it did for them physically. We're not looking for what it did for the family dynamic. We're not looking for what it did for just slowing pace down and getting rid of anxiety, helping with ADHD. All of these wonderful things, being able to take a field trip when you want. It's we thought that for a minute too, like, oh my God, what are they going to do? They're not going to have any friends. They're not going to do this. They're not going to do that. And we had to dive into it. It was like, oh, this is awesome. This is literally awesome. And yes, we had an advantage as educators, but there's some really, really smart parents out there that are not teachers that really could be teachers. They just probably chose to not do it. And yes, there will always be someone that will take advantage of the system, just like a free and reduced lunch. I can't tell you how many kids we sit there and throw away food every day, but we can't not offer it only meal. We hear it's not a cliche, that's the real thing. So we can't look at homeschool with that kind of lens either. Like, we can't offer this because someone may take advantage of that system, or they may, just skip their kid all the way up to a high school diploma, whatever the case, when there are people that they're looking at the curriculums, they're learning because of the curriculums, they're getting, we both suffer. She got better because I did most. Is we have to look at the positives about why it should happen as well, and not just look at the negatives.
Very nice. Very nice. So a whole lot in here. And now, I'm sorry, what was that, Adam?
I think Toy would add
go ahead, Toy.
as well, real quick. I'm technically not supposed to be in class because I turned all my stuff down. So he kidnapped. Just playing. Just to address a few things. The Dexter Mosley Act, the comment that was made about that, well, all of it hit home, listening to everybody, because we went through it. But our daughter, she was in public school, and we took her out so that we can homeschool everybody. Homeschooling was our only option, because while she was performing, we were traveling too much, and there were so many hoops that we had to jump through for the absences and all the things. So we had to homeschool. I'm glad that we did. It wasn't like, oh no, but like, we had to homeschool. So before we homeschooled, she was in jazz band. So because of the Dexter Mosley Act, she got to continue to participate in jazz band, which was her outlet. So I don't, again, I know that there are people who take advantage of those loopholes, but personally, it was a blessing for us that she still got to stay with her friends, still got to perform and go on trips with them, do all things. The exposure to things outside of the curriculum, like foreign languages and CTAE and all of those things. I can't remember who brought it up, but like, you get to learn everywhere, which was the beauty of homeschool for us. We could go anywhere and make it a lesson. And I learned so much from homeschooling. Like you mentioned, I suck at math. Well, not anymore, but I did. I learned so much from having to learn it to help them through. So there are so many opportunities to expose them to things outside of the core subject. Also, somebody commented about effectively having people on multiple levels. You have that in your classroom, differentiated instruction. I had a kid, I had a lower elementary student, higher elementary student, and then high school. So they were all in the room together. The same thing you would do in your classroom with differentiated instruction. Sometimes somebody's reading at this time, or I'm working with you. You might be able to work on a program. You might be doing an elective or learning French or something, right? And since COVID, they have shifted to a lot of online opportunities. So like, our daughter took drum set lessons from a dude who was overseas at one point. They all learned French from somebody like on OutSchool. So like, there's so many opportunities to get the things that we feel like they should get at school
but you have the flexibility. It's almost like a kid going to a charter school or a kid going to a private school. And most of the time, if a parent takes, yes, they're not parents who are not in it for the right reasons. I haven't met them, but I'm sure there are. If a parent takes the time to go through the whole homeschooling process and get a curriculum, set all of that up, most of the time they're committed. Like every single homeschool parent, or like I said, my daughter was able to do National Beta Club. She went to competitions, she went to conventions, and there were other homeschool groups that she got to interact with. We didn't really miss anything in my eyes. And I was telling them in our group, if I didn't need to pay bills, I would still homeschool. Just the flexibility that you have and the freedom. And to those parents who don't know, I don't know how to teach my kid math. I can't do this. They find their homeschool groups, their core cohorts. Just like I said in my group, if as a teacher, if you don't know something, you either get the answer or find somebody who does. Right? It's the same thing as a homeschool.
Awesome. So I want to end it by saying, when we say that one thing is a slap in the face, that's a choice, right? If we are offended by something, it's because we chose to be offended by it. I can almost guarantee you that anybody who has been in your program that is no longer in your program because they went to a homeschool situation, it is not because of you. It's because of other elements like what Latoya was saying, what Adam was saying, what a lot of us realize, and honestly, can you fault a parent in doing what they believe is best for their child? So, and ultimately, that is who we are serving. I kept thinking as we were talking, when a child is born in the hospital, right? And that was my only experience, was that my children were all born in a hospital. Some people don't do that, but mine did. And when they're born, the first thing they do as the dad is they give you scissors and say, would you like to cut the cord? Okay. Now, I'm not that kind of doctor, right? But I've been to the doctor and I've used scissors. And the fact that these people were willing to trust the life of my child, with my newborn child, with me when I didn't know anything about being a parent. I had parents, but I wasn't one until that moment, and handed me a very sharp implement, which, by the way, I'm left-handed. They weren't even left-handed scissors, right? And said, would you like to create a belly button on this human they're going to have forever by the way that you cut it? And I looked at that doctor and I said, listen, there's so many things that could mess up a child. Let's start with me. I'm going to mess up my child. Let me do it. And kidding, but I did. I did cut the cord on my children and it was very nice. But again, it got me thinking, that is what happens in the medical community, because a lot of times people will say, oh, well, if I was you wouldn't ask me to do that surgery on you. Well, actually, they kind of do. And we decide as parents how we are going to treat our children and what we're doing for our children. And that might not be the same response that other parents have. I don't know. There could have been 20 dads on that hall that day, and maybe 18 of them decided not to. I don't know. I didn't ask. I didn't care because they weren't the dads of my kids. Right? And that's where we come to that wholesome argument of homeschool. If we are doing what we believe is the best thing for our child, who's anybody else to judge that? Right? It really, it shouldn't matter, and it really doesn't. The fact that they say, you have to have a high school diploma or a GED, Okay, so what they're saying is there is a qualification. It might not meet your qualification, but it's a qualification. And you know what? That might be an incentive for an adult who had a very poor experience in school that maybe dropped out when it was a lot easier to do. That may have been the incentive for that adult to go get a GED so they could homeschool their own child. Who's to say, right? Um, and another thing when we're talking about the reasons for homeschooling is what's the end game? You know, where are we wanting, is this kid when you were talking about, kids going to college and look, okay, if I know what the college is requiring and I know that there's paperwork that I can or cannot submit, I'm submitting. If my plan is for my kid to go to college, I'm submitting because I want to make sure that I have at least every piece in favor of my child. Now, if my end game is for, to do what the minimum, I'd do that anyway, right? I'm not submitting because my kid's not going to college. Why? Well, because I haven't saved any money to put my kid in college anyway. Kid's not going to get a scholarship. It is what it is. I'm okay with that. And then my child will have to figure that out. But in order for my child to figure that out, they have to be able to be in the homeschool program, which means I have to have a GED or a high school diploma first. So at least there's some piece, right? Something had to be done first. Adam. Oh, no.
Oh, we parked for a quick second, so no.
Oh,
I
gotcha,
didn't want to
gotcha.
think.
All right, cool. Look, let me go over this. So I'm going to stop recording.